Calling up for consideration H.R. 5444 offered by Representative Davis. I ask unanimous consent that the Subcommittee for Indigenous Peoples of the United States be discharged from further consideration of the bill, and without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. I recognize myself to speak on the legislation. H.R. 5444, introduced by Representative Sharice Davis, is a bill that addresses a deeply painful subject for Indian country. As most of us know, this country's history toward and atrocities against Indigenous people are horrific and brutal. The stories from the Indian boarding school era are no different. For generations, Indigenous children were removed from their families and traditional communities to boarding schools to assimilate in an effort of forced assimilation on Indigenous children. Unfortunately, many experienced physical, psychological, sexual abuse as a punishment for simply practicing their cultures or speaking their traditional language. The federal government is only beginning to acknowledge its role in this horrific history and its divisive policies. H.R. 5444 will establish the Truth and Healing Commission to begin healing intergenerational trauma to the Indigenous community. The commission will uncover historical records that document unmarked grave sites of Indian boarding school children, investigate the cases of abuse that arose at boarding schools, and provide recommendations for the federal government for additional policies. I cannot emphasize enough how much needed and long overdue this legislation is. Yeah, I urge a yes vote. And it's particularly poignant to be dealing with this legislation and the formation of this commission at this time. It is not only a reckoning and a righteous reckoning with history, but it is also comes at a time in our country where the inability to understand and fully converse and dialogue and fully accept responsibility where responsibility needs to be accepted, and to deal with the facts and the truth are sorely needed. And it's not only a question of healing, it's a question of understanding. And I think this commission comes at an interesting time in our own history as a nation, independent of this commission, a time in which those same forces of intolerance and abuse seem to be on the rise. And that is, I say that without pointing fingers, I just say they're on the rise. And so I think this is particularly an important piece of legislation as a righteous reckoning on history, but it is also, I might say, timely in many ways. So before we consider any amendment, does any other member wish to be recognized to speak to the legislation?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Westerman, sir, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Early in our nation's history, the federal government funded education of Indian children to accelerate the assimilation of American Indians and Alaska Natives. While historical boarding school practices were a clear failure in federal policy, Indian education is an important service that the Bureau of Indian Education still provides today through 15 operating schools. H.R. 5444 would create a commission to address harms brought by earlier Indian boarding school policies. While I appreciate that goal, this bill goes about addressing these historic wrongs by broadly expanding federal authority. The current text of the bill is written such that it would establish an independent commission of appointed citizens with unchecked power to subpoena the federal government, schools, churches, and individuals, and it would also be funded by unlimited taxpayer dollars. And finally, this bill would pay commission members top-tier salaries in addition to their travel expenses. Last June, Secretary Holland announced a plan for the Department of Interior to investigate the consequences of Indian boarding schools and look at potential unmarked graves near old Indian school facilities. Volume 1 of the report was released on May 11, 2022. The report highlighted some of the conditions Native children endured at these schools, and it provided 8 recommendations, some of which were considerations for Congress. I believe that many of these recommendations should be further examined to ensure that policies established under this legislation are not duplicative of current and ongoing work by the Department of Interior. A key consideration is whether Congress should allocate resources to the department or a newly created commission. The department has more work to do and will have further findings that will help us shape a better piece of legislation that can help Native communities heal from the harm of boarding schools. I look forward to the amendment process for this bill, and I hope we can work together to structure the commission more efficiently and effectively. And I really hope we will give serious thought to the amendments that we offer to make this bill better, because in its current form, I will have to oppose it, and I yield back.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to be recognized on the legislation?
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much for bringing up this legislation and this markup so we can move this bill forward. For those who attended the hearing that we had in the subcommittee on Indigenous Peoples, it was clear that the abuse, what I would describe as torture, of the survivors of the boarding schools in those earlier days was just horrific. I do not think there was a dry eye in the hearing room. And what this bill does is can do, which is say, let's move forward, let's determine what happened, and then let's make recommendations as to what Congress should do and what the BIE should do. What can we do to remedy what occurred in those earlier days when children were being torn from their parents, when they were being torn from their culture, when they were abused and punished in those boarding schools, and where many of them never left those boarding schools. And we know there are many graves and often mass graves of Native American children. I believe that some of the powers that have been granted to this commission are essential. We heard in the hearing that some of the places that hold the records are unwilling to release those records, which is why they have requested that there be subpoena authority. We also know I've served as a commissioner appointed by the president, and it is common that those who serve the federal government be paid. They are not paid full-time. We are paid for the hours, the days that we serve. And I think it is unrealistic to ask those who serve the federal government on an important mission, which this indeed is, should do so without pay. And for that reason, I think that having a pay for the commissioners is simply reasonable and in line with how we do our commissions across the spectrum of the federal government. Once again, I think what we should truly listen to is all those voices that we heard of the survivors and the importance of reviewing and coming to terms with the atrocities that we committed on our own children, our Native American children. And with that, I ask my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. Ms. McCollum, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This bill is long overdue, and it's with a heavy heart that I have to say that I'm glad it is here. I actually had a friend, and I had a friend for quite a few years, only to find out later on when he felt comfortable sharing the shame he felt, the hurt he felt, the outrage he felt, and the way having been placed in a boarding school impacted him and his family. He is no longer with me. I'm not speaking for him, but I'm speaking for what he shared with me. I have the honor and privilege, as I mentioned before, along with Mr. Stauber, not only to work on national Native American Indian policies, but we have the privilege and the honor of working with Sioux and Ojibwe nations in Minnesota. And I'm sure Mr. Stauber's heard some of the stories too. As far as the payment to the members who are going to be involved in this commission, we're going to be asking and seeking out Native American tribally enrolled members who have their stories to tell to be part of this commission. And they shouldn't have to be worried about bearing any additional financial hardship in order to participate. I believe in oversight. I do it as an appropriator. You have my guarantee to be looking at this for oversight, but I want to be careful as we're talking about the amount of funding that a person might receive to be on this commission, especially in light of what your side's talking on the other side of the aisle with what's going on with oil and gas prices for transportation, to participate, that we do so in a way that doesn't cause a hardship. And let me close with this. We often hear the term intergenerational trauma. This is intergenerational trauma that I have experienced firsthand in my many years of working with tribal nations, both as a state legislator and as a member of Congress. Grandparents watching their sons and daughters have their children literally taken away from them. Parents having their children come home and their children are saying, "Why didn't you protect me?" Children who are in a boarding school all by themselves, wondering why their parents don't come and get them, and why their grandma and grandpa, and the way that the language that they speak and the customs that they have now all of a sudden are evil people. And the way that in which tribes have tried to get information for mass graves, unmarked grave sites, from churches, from the federal government, from the U.S. Department of Defense, these are records that we should be demanding. These are records that these families deserve. And so I know that there's going to be amendments offered, and Mr. Chair, I don't plan on speaking on all of them because my other colleagues will too. But as I said, I'm not speaking for my friend. I'm speaking because he was my friend. And this is not only personal to me for the many children I don't know, but this is personally for me, for the man that I met who once was a child trapped in one of these boarding schools. With that, I yield back.
Anyone else wish to be recognized on the legislation? Sir, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When the Subcommittee on Indigenous Peoples met to consider this bill several weeks ago, I found that hearing deeply moving. The establishment of the Indian boarding schools in the United States, I think, is a grave injustice committed against Indigenous peoples, and the hearing made that very clear. What else was clear is that in hearing the testimony from some of the tribal elders that appeared that day, the intent of those schools was not merely education. It was cultural assimilation, forced if necessary, and territorial dispossession. And I think that anyone that looks into the history of those tribal schools, boarding schools, would come to a similar conclusion. The stated goal of this bill is to establish a Truth and Healing Commission, and I think we could use more of both of those things in the United States today. It is my fervent desire that this bill could be broadly bipartisan when it comes to the House and go over to the Senate and pass and have this commission be established. We are offering some common sense amendments today, and I am in hopes that the majority will seriously consider these. Some of these amendments do nothing more than align the bill with what is already its stated intent. So I'll be talking more as we get into it, but I'm very much in hopes that we can come to a compromise that allows everyone to vote for this, because I think that the goals of the bill are noble ones, and this is a story that needs to be told. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Anyone else wish to be recognized? Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill, as was said, is long overdue. It's about truth, about healing, about moving forward, and about repatriation of the remains of lost children, generations of lost children. In New Mexico's 1st congressional district, we have several boarding schools that were in operation for decades, for generations, that impacted the health, the well-being, the survival, and the cultural heritage of our communities. And this bill is critical to helping to tell the story of these schools, of the families, of the children, and the generations that were lost to this trauma. I wholeheartedly support this bill, and I look forward to its passage out of committee today. I'm particularly grateful to our Secretary of the Interior, Secretary Deb Haaland, who is helping to lead this work at the federal level in the administration, and want to acknowledge the families who are still experiencing loss and trauma as a result of this dark chapter in our nation's history. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. Anyone else wish to be recognized? If there's no further debate, we can begin the amendment process. Without objection, the annex offered by myself is considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Ranking Member Westerman, you have an amendment designated number 2. Sir, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this amendment would simply strike the authorization of the wide open statement of such sums as may be necessary to fund the commission. As I said, I'm concerned that this commission will duplicate efforts that the Secretary of the Interior is already undertaking. Expanding government typically creates more problems than it solved, and there is no clear need to create a commission to examine a problem that the government has already said it is looking into. There's especially no need to write a blank check for the commission. This amendment will make sure that the continued government spending has sideboards on it, and that and it'll also reaffirm that we can't simply keep spending like there are no consequences. I support the amendment, and I yield back.
Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Chair, as I
Ms.
believe,
McComb.
as I believe is the only appropriator on this committee by waiver, and I thank the chair for allowing me to serve. When authorizing bills were originally written, it was such sums as may be needed. Because appropriators, we are given, you hear the allocations, 320Bs, that is the number that leadership working out with the four corners of the appropriators, House and Senate, agree to a limit as to how much can be written in an appropriations bill. In that appropriations bill for Interior, it's USGS, Geological Survey, it's Parks, it's EPA, it's Bureau of Land Management, it's Bureau of Indian Education, Bureau of Indian Health. I could go on because we have a lot of small agencies. And so the reason why it's such sums as must be needed, it is for the appropriators to figure out within that allocation how to divide up that money rather than the committee authorizing mandate. Now, it has become custom and usage around here for the authorizers to put in the dollar amount to tell the appropriators what to do, and then people come in and they go, well, no, this is how much money it's supposed to be because it said it right here in this bill. And so maybe I'm a little old-fashioned, but I'm going to stand up for the such sums as may be required because I can tell you with the allocation that the Interior Committee gets, it is not going to be a blank check. But so being a history teacher by trade, I thought I would have a little bit of opportunity here to explain how authorizing used to take place and appropriating used to take place. And right now what we have is the two often getting conflated and mixed up together. So, Mr. Chair, based on the custom and usage you have witnessed, I would hope that you would support opposing this amendment. And to the ranking member, based on the custom and usage that you have seen over the years, I can understand why you would be concerned. But trust me, there is no blank check in the Appropriations Committee that deals with the Department of Interior and that. We would love to have more money if you'd like to lobby with me to get a larger allocation. With that, I yield back and I oppose the amendment.
Let me recognize myself in response to the gentlelady's comments. My intent with Mr. Westerman's amendment was to remove that language, all sums as necessary. And the reason for that is that going back to the good old days, to allow the appropriation process to do its process and to allocate the money that would be necessary from that point of view to the commission. If that's appropriate as an agreement, that's the process that would work. If the opposition, Mr. Westerman, is to that boilerplate language of such sums as may be necessary, if it's removed, I'm not opposed to your amendment. I'm willing to accept the amendment and yield to Mr. Westerman for any comment.
They say in sales, when you got a deal, shut up. So thank you.
No, and part of the deal is that you have to trust Ms. McCollum. That's that all things will be done right. With that, if there's no objection, the amendment is accepted, and we move to Representative Obernold. You have an amendment designated number 3, and you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had a robust discussion in the subcommittee on the compensation of the members of the commission. And the thought was that we don't want to impose a financial hardship on tribal members who are asked to give of their time to represent their tribes on the commission. However, it's also clear that the amount of compensation that's being contemplated here is quite high. Schedule 5 under the executive schedule for the general schedule pay rates is about $174,000 a year. And I think the intent of everyone here is that that amount of money would apply only for the days that the commission is in session. So in other words, this wouldn't be a full-time job. This would be something where a daily pay rate would be extended. My amendment simply makes that clarification, and I urge its adoption.
Gentleman yields. Anyone else wish to be recognized on the amendment? Ms. McCollum, you recognized?
If the gentleman would yield to a couple of questions, so just the days, so a travel day, any day of preparation, any day that they were working on their own to go out and do fact-finding at sites. Would you please describe to me what your definition of a business travel day is?
So as, thank you, the gentlewoman, for yielding. As the amendment states it, it says that the commission conducts official business meetings. So I think the intention is, this is a commission on truth and healing. We want to have commission hearings where these tribal members come and testify before the commission. So if the commission is conducting a business meeting, I think time spent in furtherance of that is the point we're trying to make.
So travel time, any preparation time, anything that they did on their own to inform them and make them a more, productive commission member, none of that, all that time would be on their own. They wouldn't be compensated for any time. You know, as you know, you're working from home, you're working on the weekends, you're reading things, we're salaried. But you would basically just say only the days that you came, or if it's virtual or in person, where business was being conducted by the committee of the whole, those would be the only days that you would be reimbursed for. I just want to be clear on your intent.
Sure. Well, the amendment is worded rather broadly, that the commission conducts official business meetings. So I'm not a lawyer. If I was, from a layman's perspective, if I was interpreting that, I would say that travel time would be included in that because that's related to the official business meeting. Time spent on the weekend reading and preparation, I would say would not be, but I'm open to any clarification that you'd want to make to that, but that was our idea for...
Reclaiming my time.
Certainly.
Right now, I'm going to oppose your amendment, but I look forward to working with you on language as we move towards the floor. To clarify anything, but right now, I think you and I are close in definition, but with neither one of us being attorneys, I think we need to talk to the people who draft the bill. So I thank the chair and I yield back.
Anyone else wish to be recognized on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Westerman.
I would like to add that the bill does include per diem, so travel would be covered. But what this amendment would do would strike full salaries for members of the commission established under the bill. And the way it's currently worded, it sounds like it's a full-time job all year, and they would be compensated for that. This would create an advisory commission to investigate the impacts and ongoing effects of historic Indian boarding school policy. The bill entitles members of the commission to a daily salary rate equivalent to $76,300 a year for any day the member is engaged in the performance of the duties of the commission. As written, the bill could lead to paying exorbitantly high salary to commission members who would also not be required to give up their permanent jobs in order to serve on the commission. Mr. Obernolte's amendment would set reasonable sideboards for commission member compensation, ensuring they're only paid for days the commission is actually meeting. I support the amendment. I think it's a step in the right direction. If we need to work on it some more, then I think we're obviously open to working on it. But the idea is that we pay people fairly for the days they're working, but we don't create just a large salary for when people may not be working. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Now, theoretically, if that concept applied to members of Congress, theoretically, Mr. Albin, your point is well taken, and I agree with Ms. McCollum on that. I think definition and wording needs to. I'm going to be done on it, but it's important right now to. I'm going to oppose your amendment because I believe that the commission, that the work on the commission is going to be continuous, and the deliberation is going to be continuous, and there's going to be a necessity for these commission members as representatives of this healing and truth initiative that Congress is undertaking, that they're going to represent and interface with communities across this country, indigenous and otherwise. And so where do we define that continuous time? And that's my question, and the same question that Ms. McCollum was asking. So I'm going to oppose your amendment with my intent and Ms. McCollum's intent to pursue what that definition and what those guardrails would be. And I look forward to those discussions. With that, any other member wish to be recognized on the amendment?
Mr. Chair,
Sir.
I do support the amendment, and I think the cooperation from the minority and the majority here to look at the opportunities to have that discussion. I am fully supportive of the underlying bill. And I yield back.
Anyone else? Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing no further debate, the question is on Mr. Obernold's amendment number 3 to the legislation. I will pause so the members join can remotely unmute. All those in favor of Mr. Obernold's amendment number 3 indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed to the amendment indicate by saying no. No.
No.
No.
In the opinion of the chairs, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chair, if I could request the yeas and nays on that, please.
Gentleman has requested a recorded vote, and that vote will be postponed pursuant to the prior announcement. Mr. Ranking Member Westerman, you have an amendment designated number 1, and you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. This amendment would strike the Commission's authority to unilaterally issue subpoenas to compel information from private citizens, schools, churches, and the federal government. H.R. 5444 proposes creating a Truth and Healing Commission on Indian boarding school policies. While I appreciate the need to look into this troubling aspect of our national history, I also have concerns about whether this commission would duplicate efforts that the Secretary of the Interior is already undertaking. It is especially concerning that this bill proposes to give this federal advisory commission broad authority to issue subpoenas of its own initiative without any oversight from Congress or a federal agency. Only 12 out of 166 congressional advisory commissions have subpoena authority. The bar for granting unilateral subpoena authority to federal commissions is necessarily high. Congress has limited this authority to commissions examining issues such as financial institution enforcement, reducing government secrecy, and terrorist attacks. I urge support of this amendment to strip the commission's subpoena authority, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Any other member wish to be recognized on Mr. Westerman's amendment number 1? I recognize myself.
Mis-
Ms. Ledger,
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Ledger Fernandez,
Mr.
you're
Chair.
recognized.
Mr. Chair, at the hearing, we heard of the difficulties that the survivors and organizations were having receiving the data and information from the churches. And so I think that there is the need to have the authority to subpoena, to gather data. I am not opposed to having some kind of oversight from the committee, but I do think we need to make sure that they are able to get their job done. And so I think we might need to work on this amendment as well, perhaps before it hits the floor, but I would oppose the amendment as presently written, but would be open to looking at some kind of oversight for the committee to have, but still providing that authority to the commission, precisely because we heard of the difficulties that the organizations have in receiving documents.
Yields. Anyone else wish to be recognized on the gentleman's amendment? Mr. Westerman's amendment number 1?
Mr. Obel-Note.
Oh, Mr. Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We, as the chair of the subcommittee just stated, we had an extensive discussion about this at the hearing. It can't be understated how unusual it is to grant this kind of authority to an appointed commission. There are standing committees here in the House of Representatives that don't even have subpoena authority. This committee, however, does have a subpoena authority. So I'm in hopes that there is some middle ground here that would allow the commission the ability to get access to the information that it needs without granting them authority that even some standing committees in the House of Representatives lacks. So as Chair Ledger Fernandez stated, there are other ways that we can approach this problem. We can have the commission come to us, come to a subcommittee, or with the concurrence of our colleagues in the Senate to subpoena the information that they want. Perhaps they can make a suggestion that would be subject to our disapproval, but I think that there are other ways that we can do this. So I'm in hopes that perhaps there's some room to negotiate here. And I would also, just make the point, we've been talking about these objections to the bill now for almost a month. And I actually think that we're not exercising our bipartisan muscles enough here because, I was hoping that we would come into this hearing with agreement on these different points so that we could offer amendments in exactly the format that would be acceptable to yourself and the rest of the committee. So in the future, that's what I would hope, because obviously it's very difficult for us to negotiate legal language sitting here at the dais. And we've got other stakeholders that we want to weigh in. But if we could accelerate this process a little bit more in the future, have these discussions a little sooner, and hopefully come to a hearing like this, come to a markup with language that everyone has agreed to, I think it would be more productive. I yield back.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and I'll recognize Ms. McCall. Your suggestion is a good one, and effort, and I think directions from majority, minority to their respective staffs in terms of highlighting those points and engaging in those points. We'll continue to make those, you'll continue to make those, but at some point, if there is something to be worked out, there's some accountability involved here. And if I don't think we've been remiss in trying to work out some language issues, either under the direction of the subcommittee chairs and their staffs, but I see your point, and it's a point well taken. Thank you. Ms. McCollum.
Mr. Chair, I also agree. I think on the last couple of conversations that we've had, perhaps it has been a missed opportunity now that we're together more, that COVID's not happening to work together. I would suggest reaching out to Mr. Cole and Ms. Davis. The Native American Caucus is the only truly hardworking bipartisan caucus here in Congress, and I think that they could be of help in working with the committee on doing that. I don't want to see this struck for this reason at this point. I think there is room to move, to come closer together, what you were talking about, and work with this committee to get the subpoena power, but I don't want to remove it. Once you take, I'm afraid once we take this out, it will be hard for us to put it back in together, and I mean that bipartisanly, to put the subpoena power back in together. I think we need to work on it. The reason why I feel so outraged that the churches will not share this information, the churches were paid by the federal government. Taxpayers paid them to do this. So we have a right to see that, and so do they. So both on you know, the compensation in this, I sincerely will do what I can either in the Appropriations Committee or working with the committee at large to address this. I think these are obstacles that won't be in our way if we really sit down and do the hard work that needs to happen, and you have my commitment to do that. With that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. Anyone else wish to be recognized before I recognize myself? Yeah, the legislation's subpoena power authority is already narrow in scope. It's confined to records from a period of time that non-federal entities operated Indian boarding schools through federal contracts and otherwise. And, you know, the commission is not going to have the power to subpoena documents from non-federal entities outside that scope. But fundamentally, removing subpoena power from this commission, I think, basically cuts out its independence and cuts out the intent and the soul of what this commission is trying to do. The power that the subpoena has, even by implication, is that the power to compel. And much of what we need to have done with this commission is compel people to bring forth so that healing and truth can be part of that discussion. I think the subpoena power guarantees that the remains of loved ones, particularly children, are located and returned to their families. In following up on the discussion that's been ongoing, if the scope of that subpoena power is seen as something that needs to be taken out, I will oppose that. And I will oppose the amendment now with the hope that conversations can reach a level of consensus on it. But I think it's important to leave it in there. It is, I think, the authority and the heart of this commission, and to take it out is to basically strip this commission of what the intent is of the legislation. But open to suggestions that does not cut out the heart and the intent of the legislation. With that, yield back and recognize anyone else that wishes to speak on Mr. Obelnote's amendment. If not, let me pause so the members can remotely unmute and ask those in favor of the amendment, number 3, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed to the amendment indicate by saying no.
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 In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The noes have it, and the
Mr. Chair, I request the ayes and nays.
recorded vote being asked be postponed as per prior announcement. Where we at? We know. For 5 minutes.
I apologize, Mr. Chair. Did you recognize me?
Yes, I did.
You
Thank
cut
you.
out. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If the purpose of this legislation is to bring truth and healing to the nation, there is no reason to oppose this amendment that I am offering. This amendment ensures that the commission, should it be established, tailors its work on something similar to what the Department of Interior is already doing, to insist that reparations are a plausible recommendation for this partisan commission is both disingenuous and harmful. Insisting on reparations will not bring people together. It will not serve the goal of reconciliation. Reparations have only ever been used as a talking point by Democrat politicians to move a political agenda. For several members serving in this Congress, as well as the sitting Vice President of the United States, it has been weaponized in the service of presidential aspirations. You will undoubtedly hear talking points from Democrats arguing that reparations are necessary to atone for the sins of the past. However, it is a flat out illogical and immoral to punish individuals who have had nothing to do with past historical wrongs. It is appropriate to punish the perpetrator of a crime, not his descendant. It is an unserious policy proposal that will lead to the breakdown of our nation's social fabric if it's adopted and becomes normalized. If we in the Congress help establish a norm that a subset of the American population is entitled to compensation from another subset of population, anyone and everyone with a historical grievance could be entitled to reparations, and the process would be never ending. Could individuals claim reparation against those responsible for the 1973 Supreme Court decision Roe v. Wade, which is responsible for the murder of 65 million babies? Could individuals claim reparations against the sponsor of the Davis-Bacon Act, which was developed to, quote, the Democrat sponsor of that bill, to counter a superabundance of African American labor? Could someone lodge a reparations request against the federal government for its implementation of Great Society programs that have contributed to the breakdown of the nuclear family? Could anyone lodge a reparations request against the Democrat constructed welfare state to include Great Society programs that has kept low income Americans stuck in generational poverty? I have no issues with confronting and addressing any historical wrongs, but the use of reparations seems to be less of a real policy proposal and more of a Democrat talking point.
Would the
It is
gentlelady yield for a
irresponsible.
question?
No, it is irresponsible and only serves to pit Americans against each other. Democrats continue to do everything they can to divide Americans based on race and other distinctive social characteristics. All of this amendment does is remove the topic of reparations as a potential recommendation of the commission. Any opposition to this proposal would be a vote in favor of politicizing the commission's work, which is not an outcome anyone here is hoping for. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Let me recognize myself. First of all, there is no reference in the legislation to reparations, none whatsoever. Now, at the end of the process, and as we're going through the process, recommendations from the commission might come on potentially appropriating resources for mental health support, funerary assistance and services, and other services that would promote healing. Now, in the strict sense of, in terms of the definition just provided by the gentlelady, I don't know where that falls under her definition of reparations. It falls under, to me, the continuation of a healing process, but be that as it may. I think the language is fine. There is no reference to reparation, and it is specific to a chapter, ongoing chapter in history that needs to be dealt with. I think through the whole process of the preparation of this legislation, very conscious, both the authors and the subcommittees that dealt with it, very conscious of making sure that the scope was the intent of the legislation and the focus was the intent of the legislation, not beyond those borders. And anything that might extraneously bother the sponsor of the amendment, politically or otherwise, is not germane to this question and not appropriate in terms of this amendment to the legislation. And with that, I would urge opposition. Anyone else wish to be recognized?
Public hearing, a lot of stuff was discussed there. I spoke with Grijalva.
Hearing no further debate, the question is on Board Bill Amendment number 1 to the bill. I will pause so the members supporting the legislation, the amendment can indicate by saying aye. All those in,
Can we try that again?
all those in favor of the amendment indicate by saying aye.
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 All those opposed to the legislation indicate by saying no.
No.
Nope. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentlelady would be requesting a recorded vote, if I'm correct?
yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And the vote will be postponed pursuant to prior announcement. H.R. 6707, I'm going to ask, there's a call that I must make back home to, that I must make, and I asked Chairman Huffman if he would please proceed with the rest of the meeting, and I'll return as soon as I can, sir. Thank you. Good luck. No, I'm good, Just- I don't-